So a while ago, I purchased a Lee Enfield Sentry 177 rifle. At first, I kind of enjoyed it, and then I bought some other things and kind of moved on past it and kind of forgot about it. So I was looking through the gun locker recently and decided that I wanted to take it out again and make some changes to it, do it up, make it nice, good looking, maybe improve the performance if possible. So this video is all going to be about the transformation of my Lee Enfield Sentry, along with the help of AI. So we got ChatGPT to render an image of things that I requested that I might want to make it look like. I'm kind of happy with how we're aiming towards this. Before we start, we need to go ahead and check the performance of the rifle, both accuracy and power. So let's get into it. (14 to 15-yard distance). This is one magazine, so 9 pellets in the 177 model. To give an accuracy test on one magazine only, and we're going to go ahead and use the Diablo Air Arms 7.87 grains. Final grouping came out the size of a 5p piece. Pretty good. Okay, so now that we've got the rifle taken apart into different bits, I'm going to go ahead and start with the cosmetics. We've got the stock, there's no cheek piece in, there's no backrest, so we're going to go ahead and sand this down, probably starting off with a 160 grit, and then we'll see how it looks before we burn it. So I realised during the course of sanding that a 160 grit was far too fine for an initial go. I think we went 80 and then went to 120 in the end. The only real thing I had to take care with here sanding was it was the exterior of the stock only. I didn't want to sand and change any dimensions where the tube sits, the air cylinder. I don't want to make any tolerances loose or anything too tight. For later on with paint and varnish, is the only thing we do not touch was the inside of the stock where components will sit. Okay, so after completing sanding down yesterday, we started off with an 80 grit and then moved to a 120. Stock is now sanded and we are ready to do a bit of wood burning. So we're essentially going to do a shuggy band technique. It's a Japanese style where you basically torch the wood. We're going to go for a light burn and then stain red. So yeah, let's see how this goes. So when doing this Japanese burning technique, one thing to keep in mind is you want to keep that blowtorch moving all the time. You don't want to stand too long in the same spot and overburn an area. Especially when the stock for the Lee Enfield Sentry is a European beech, I believe, which is a hardwood, it's classed as a hardwood. Makes this burning technique a bit more difficult to do. Usually this is done on softwoods like pine, so take your time, keep moving that blowtorch, trying to overscore areas. Also try and take care not to burn on the inside of the stock where any air cylinder or components will sit, only on the externals. Lightly burned with a blowtorch, ready to get a little bit of brushing and sanding, and we'll see how this comes out. Can't wait. So all I'd done here was I'd taken a little bit of steel wool and had gently rubbed the stock just to get off any residual soot that was left. Once that was done, went ahead with a 600 grit sandpaper and very lightly sanded the stock so that we just take off the very top layer of soot. Alright, we've mixed up our paint. I'm going to go with an oil-based paint mixed in with some paint thinner. Give ourselves hopefully a nice little stain. Going with a bit of a red colour. I'm using approximately 1 part paint to 1 part thinner, trying to get a nice thick coat on. Let's see how this goes. Try and brush it with the grain, nice and light. What you don't want is you don't want any drips, so you just keep going back and forth with the brush until that coat of stain is sunk in. So carrying on from yesterday, where we left off is I did 3 coats of stain and it was thinned down with some paint thinner. I'm quite happy with how it's turned out and I'm happy to go ahead and varnish this and seal it. So I've gone to the shop today, we've got some satin clear coat varnish and we're going to go ahead and get this all varnished and finished. See how it looks. So this is the wrap I got off of Amazon. Put it up there for you guys to see. This was the original AI image that I'd kind of gone towards, but in the end I decided to change and go for a slightly different style from Amazon. Now, bearing in mind I have never done any sort of vinyl wrapping whatsoever, this was a bit of a learning curve, and with no heat gun to hand, the hairdryer came out and was as good as it could be. So after reassembling the rifle, in the end we ended up with a wrapped moderator, a wrapped barrel and a wrapped cheek piece put back onto the stock that was stained red and varnished. That was the final how it turned out on looks. I was happy with the final results, so the next thing up was to go ahead and try and improve the performance of the rifle. Now, when it comes to talking about tuning of air rifles, there's a plethora of things that get spoke about: pellets, transfer ports, regulators, hammer springs, all sorts of things. The main two that we're going to focus on is the regulator and hammer spring in this video. Essentially, the regulator is a piece of an air rifle that goes inside the air tube, and it will take high pressure air on one side and it will lower that pressure to a constant output on the low pressure side. In the case of the Lee Enfield Sentry, typically the full pressure is about 3000 psi, and on the 2.2 model, I believe the output pressure is about 1500 psi standard. Now, obviously, we saw that our power levels on pre-test were sub 10 foot-pounds. There's different ways of increasing this. What we're going to do is we're going to take a look at upping the pressure in the regulator. Because it's quite a large difference in power between sub 12 and sub 10, the regulator increase is the first step we're going to go with. And then once we're happy with the regulator changes, we can go ahead and fine tune with the hammer spring tension. So what we're looking at just now is the regulator of the Lee Enfield Sentry. It has a double O-ring backup for the section there of the regulator, which is nice to see. Some regulators only have a single barrier, not a double barrier. It's a nice design. What we also have on this regulator is quite a large valve body in plenum, so plenty of air can get supplied. As far as design goes, externally, it's quite a decent design of regulator. My only concern is that with the rifle being underpowered, has this regulator suffered some sort of damage over the years, or is it just the way it's set by possibly a previous owner? So we're going to go ahead now and adjust this. A couple of spanners here. So my one, I've not touched it. It has a marking on it for what I've put on it just now of its current position. So I need to go ahead and back off the lock nut first. And then we're going to go ahead and wind this out a little bit. Let's be really careful with this not to accidentally move the adjustment screw more than required. So on my one, sometimes it's got a Phillips head or a flathead screwdriver. On my one, it's a spanner. So I'm going to go ahead and back this out one full turn. Starting off with position here. Now we've got our lock nut. I go ahead and wind the lock nut down, and that will lock our regulator in position. And like I say, the only way to really do this properly is to put it back in the rifle and chrono it. You could attach this to a pressure gauge if you have the setup. I don't. Maybe something I'll get in the future, but I don't have a pressure gauge set up to actually record this, so it's going to have to be back in the rifle and chronoed. So after reassembling the rifle and doing our first shot string, the rifle was filled to about 2500 psi and our shots were coming out about 191 meters a second, massively underpowered compared to before, and kind of left me scratching my head if I had changed the regulator in the correct direction. However, continued to shoot shot strings, and what was noticed was as the pressure and the tube fell, the velocities were getting higher and higher recorded, so the energy output was actually becoming more as pressure in the fill side was going down. Behaviour that's usually seen in unregulated rifles, which had me scratching my head about how functional the regulator was actually behaving. However, we decided to persist and graph this using the help of AI. So I handed over the results recorded to ChatGPT. It interpreted the results, made some nice graph for me, and then based off of that, determined what we went ahead and changed for the next test. Now, initially I thought I'd be doing 3 or 4 tests at the most. Ended up being 12 in the end. Now, as part of these adjustments, one of them was the hammer spring tension. I've got a short clip here of the shims that I added, where I added them to, and an additional adjustment I made by inserting a piece of plastic down the middle of the hammer spring itself to try and reduce the twanging noise that I was hearing when firing the rifle. A bit of plastic down the middle as a sheath, some washers as a spacer. Hopefully increasing that hammer spring tension will mean that valve stays open for longer and more of that regulator pressure will get a chance to come out. And indeed that did work the trick. We had the spacers, the washers providing extra preload on the spring, and the plastic inside the hammer spring acted like a dampener, massively reducing any twang when shots were taken. Coming back to how the results of these tests were interpreted, for each test that was performed, a table like I was shown in front of you just now was made, just recorded by hand. These values were then put into ChatGPT, or any other AI is available, of course. And a graph was made showing the velocity versus pump pressure curve. This velocity was later changed to kinetic energy for better comparison. Also, as the tests went on, to start to take a note of the position of the adjustment screw relative to where it started. on number of turns. And our graphs got a little bit fancier. This one's graphed with foot-pounds of energy. This was after 4 tests total. And by the end, we had completed a full graph that had shown 12 separate tests, their curves, along with the position of the regulator for each test and the hammer shim on it also. By analyzing this data as we went, it was clear to see how useful it was becoming and how the effects of changing regulator and hammer spring tension were adjusting the curve. So we settled on test 12, which you can see there is the orange line in that graph. That was the final one used. We had good shots from about 2600 psi fill pressure to about 1500 psi fill pressure. On top of that, we have some other graphs that were generated also. We have a sundial graph showing position of the regulator for each test. Also made a summary of tuning, which showed all 12 tests, the amount of shim added for the hammer spring tension, it had the regulator position, all info that was required to make sound decisions on the next test going forward to try and tune this rifle, which I think in the end, judging by test 12, was a success as we ended up getting an average foot-pounds of energy between 11.3 and 11.8 foot-pounds over a 1,200 psi range approximately. So in conclusion, cosmetically, the rifle turned out in a way that I was happy with. It's a little bit different from the concept art from the initial target generated by ChatGPT that I was going for. Certain features I left out. Just as I was going with the rifle, I decided to tweak some things. The trigger I painted red instead of the gold or brass color that was in the image from ChatGPT. I just preferred the look of it as I was going along with the rifle. So cosmetically, I'm happy with where it's ended up. Performance-wise, I've only had the chance to test it over the same 14 yards in the garden, but the spread on the pellet testing itself came out to be almost identical to pre any work done. So I'll need to get it out at a longer range, 30 to 40 yards, and check for consistency at a longer distance now that the tuning has proven that over a larger range of pressure, the pellets are much more stable on the energy output. So there's still some testing to be done at a later date. But as it stands just now, I'm happy with how it looks. There was no need to change the transfer port. I measured the ID of the transfer port, the stock one, and it was at 3.25 millimeters. So I saw no need to drill that out to increase that ID any further, playing only with the regulator and the hammer spring tension or compression. And I think the rifle's turned out in a way that I'm happy with it. It looks all good. It's better than it was at the start. And I hope that this inspires anyone else to go ahead and customize their own air rifle. Thank you for watching.